call this meeting of the Bylaw Study Committee to order, and as we have, hold it a second. Anyway, picking up where I left off. As we have one committee member attending remotely, we will take a roll call of all the members. Greg Marr here, Brian Langevin, Andy Jefferson here, Skip Courier.
You guys there?
Are you hearing us, Skip?
Can you hear me, Skip?
That doesn't seem to be muted over there.
Nope.
Oh, well.
Yeah, it's set to the owls.
Yeah, it seems like it's picking up audio.
All right, let's run a quick audio check here.
Reconnecting.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
I see the microphone moving.
Can't tell if I'm in this or not.
Okay. Can you hear us now, Skip?
Oh, something just happened.
Can you hear us now?
All right, speakers on, Skip.
You guys there?
Okay. Yeah, we're here. I just turned on closed eye transcription and it's seeing it, so. It's not very good, but it's seeing it. So our attendee can hear us as well. Thank you, Dan.
Looks like Skip is attempting to reconnect. All right, I just got an email from Skip saying that he's coming, he's gonna be coming over here.
Okay.
So we can expect. Skip in a few minutes. Shall we proceed? To some extent, at least.
Sure.
So, where were we?
We were in the middle of a roll call.
All right. Always a few glitches, it just seems like. Anyway, so proceeding with our meeting agenda. Our first agenda item is public comment. And if we don't seem to have any members of the public in the meeting room with us, we do have one member on attendee on Zoom. If he's interested in speaking on any topic, now would be the time to raise your hand and we can.
His
get you
Q&A
in.
says he'd like to ask about some things, so we'll let him in.
Yes, I will. Sign here. All right, Mr. Fitzgerald, you are now able to speak.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, sir. How are you? So I heard you spoke at town meeting. That's kind of what motivated me to join tonight. Is you were passionate about the bylaw committee, and so I felt as though I wanted to be involved. I did send an email back in October. I'm on the Board of Registrars, and it doesn't really seem like too much is related to that. So it didn't really seem like I would have had anything based on the responses I got. It's like, hey, thanks. But so tonight I had some questions about Article 1, but I know that I think you guys, my understanding is you've already touched on some of those things. So my questions may not be relevant, or so I didn't quite know that. And maybe my best route would be to email the things I had questions about as opposed to this conversation.
I think we'd be happy to take your comments now and either make note of them and answer them in the future as need be, or if we can answer them right away, that's fine too. That's one of the reasons why our public comment agenda item is here.
Okay, I'm trying to, if you can just bear with me. So with regards to Article 1, specifically Section 9. So in Section 9, you've struck all other town officers and added and multiple member bodies. So I was curious if there is an actual official definition of town officers as far as the committee is concerned, using both those words, town officer, as opposed to, you took out town in the Section 9 strike of what looks like what's going to be the amendments that you're going to make. So I didn't know if in some of the other language, right? So as the registrar piece kind of goes with Mass General Law, and they do specifically talk about town offices. So I didn't know if and I apologize for my ignorance on it, but I didn't know if Grafton in either the bylaws or the charter speaks specifically to town officers.
Yeah, town officer is referenced in the charter multiple times.
The charter has a definition of town officer.
Okay, so that's on me. It just seemed like with the Section 9 piece, if you strike town out of town officers, where it used to say all other town officers shall be appointed as follows, and then you've added and, so when you strike out town, it says officers and multiple member bodies. It seems like that's a distinction. Officers are not part of multiple member bodies, but I may just be misinterpreting it.
Yeah, no, that is essentially correct. And the word officer, when not otherwise qualified, has a pretty well understood meaning in law.
Okay. I guess the other part, one of the other questions I had was regarding when you talk about the revisions, when you explain about the revisions for Article 1, you talk about TA, let's see, would seem to cover, you're including the appointment. I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought here. let me try to go back and see if I can pick up exactly what you. I've lost my train of thought and my notes aren't really clear to me. So I appreciate you giving me the time and I'm going to listen to, as the meeting goes on. If I come up with it, I'll either print it and I'll send it to you that way. But thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and you're always welcome to follow up with, emailing us through the website or attending the meetings anyway. Yeah, we're always happy to, take input, answer questions. Hopefully, in the end, we'll be producing something that is good, but it helps if we answer all the questions ahead of time.
One of the general questions I did have is with regards to, I know the thought was that the bylaws were more easily fixed or edited as opposed to the charter itself. And one of the things I was curious about is it doesn't seem like either in the charter or in the bylaws, it talks about the appointment of a recreation director. And so I was wondering if the board had any opinion with regards to that, if that's something that they wouldn't look at as far as maybe adding to the bylaws. It's an appointment. So there's an appointment with regards to the Recreation Commission, but there isn't anything in either the bylaws or the charter that talks about the appointment of a recreation director. So I was curious if that has come up in your conversations.
Yeah. Yes, that is an example of a position that comes under the administrative organization of the town. And that's covered to a large extent, if I remember right, it's Article 4 of the charter, which basically gives the town administrator pretty much full control over how the town administrative organization of the town is structured. So the town administrator gets to decide what positions exist and what the organization looks like. So the recreation director falls under that administrative organization.
And I guess I do understand. But the thought would be that the catch-all is there basically for a position that hasn't really been established or that might be flexible. Whereas I think that position is clearly established. And I was just wondering if that might be something the bylaw you folks might take up as to put into the bylaw specifically. And then at some point it would be added to the charter. And my understanding may be completely wrong, but it's been a question that's come up over the years. With regards to it, it's just like, okay, it's some of the other appointments for the town administrator are identified, like, plumbing inspector or animal inspector or animal control officer. And yet this one never seems to be added either to the charter or the bylaw piece. And I was just wondering if the rationale for that, why maybe you guys might not address that.
Yeah, I guess we could contemplate that further, but as a general rule, we think it's wise to avoid putting things in the bylaws that don't really need to be there. Some of the positions in the administrative organization are mentioned in the bylaws for various reasons. And I don't know that we've gone through and reviewed all of that. For example, there's a bylaw article about the town accountant. Or a bylaw article, a couple of positions, treasurer, collector. There's a few other positions that they're in the bylaws because the bylaw has something to say about the duties and responsibilities of that position. Other positions, the town planner, for example, that's a pretty important position in town, but that's not anywhere addressed in the bylaws. Because and some of it is just historical. They're in the bylaws because they've always been there. In other cases, they're not in the bylaws because there's nothing that a bylaw needs to say about them. But yeah, I'd say for now, it's probably worthwhile for us to take that into consideration and think about that. The extent to which positions within the administrative organization need to be in the bylaw. If there's a recreation director, for example, if there is something that a bylaw needs to say about the recreation director, that could be added. I don't know.
It's so and I noticed that in some of your amendments, you certainly addressed the commission. You know what I mean? So to add I saw the addition of 5 members appointed for terms of 3 years. So that was good. That's going to be added into the bylaws. And again, maybe it's not. I could never understand though over the years why that one. And so, I've gone to recreation meetings. I've, done recreational things and so forth. So what I was kind of struck out as who appoints, eventually I learned or came to understand that it was appointed by the TA, the town administrator. But then I was like, well, why isn't it in there like the other people? And, part of me started to feel like, well, maybe the town never had a consistent recreational director, so it wasn't necessary. But yeah, I appreciate you addressing it. And so that was just the second question that I had. So thank you very much.
Let me follow that up with one additional point. You mentioned the Recreation Commission, which reminds me that the reason the Recreation Commission is listed in this revised Article 1, Section 9, is there's basically 2 reasons. One, the primary reason is that there are other bylaws that reference a Recreation Commission. So there are other bylaws that imply that a Recreation Commission has to exist. And there is no place else in the bylaws that defines how many members a Recreation Commission has. And so that's kind of, I left that in there precisely because of another bylaw that basically requires that there be a Recreation Commission. So it needs to be mentioned, and then this mentions here that it's 5 members for 3 years, because there's nowhere else that defines the number of members of the RecCom or their terms. But that's kind of an example of what I mean when I say if something needs to be in the bylaw, we'll keep it in there or add it. But if it doesn't need to be there, most other commissions and boards, there's nothing else in the bylaw that says they have to exist, so we kind of left them out.
No, I appreciate the explanation. That's a good explanation. I completely understand. And I know at times, so my understanding with that is in talking to some of the people, I know at times they kick around making it a 7-member board, and that would just be, so when I saw that you had that amendment, I was like, okay, that's just simply going to be a bylaw change if they go with that to make it to consist of 7 as opposed to consist of 5. They kick it around every once in a while. I don't think it's anything that's coming up quickly or whatever else, but I did understand that part of it, so thank you.
Yeah, going back a ways in history, the Conservation Commission was at one time 9 members, and then 7, and it's whatever it is now, 5 now. And every time we wanted to change the number of Concom members, we amended the bylaw to do that.
Understood. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you for your input and your thoughts.
Absolutely.
All righty. And next agenda item, action item list updates, if any.
Yeah, so just had a few. I figured see if anything comes out of tonight's meeting, and then we can send out a refreshed version. Main updates have really only dealt with closing out some open questions for a few of the new drafts that have gone around.
Did it work?
Article 24.
It's working now.
It's working on our end.
We can hear you now. We could hear you before, but you can hear us now.
Yeah, it said it was in practice mode.
Yeah, from our end, it was not in practice.
Oh, well.
Yeah, we just had public comment.
Yeah, we have to add a public comments. So, yeah, Zoom was really acting funky on my computer. It just wasn't responding and doing things, and so it actually disconnected me from Zoom at one point. So I don't know whether something odd in my computer was following up Zoom for you, but
I logged in and out a couple of times trying to
Yeah.
see if that would do it.
oh well. So, yeah, we're just talking about the updated.
So yeah, minor updates. Yeah, we'll send out the updated version out there.
Yeah, and I noticed we received a couple of public comments via email, one of which Greg has already responded to. The other one, since that presumably you include that, you'll added those in the action item list. That's probably an appropriate time just to mention those. The other comment was Dan was reading our revised Article 1, Section 8, where we took out the sentence that talks about one elective office at a time. We took it out because it's in the charter and we don't need to repeat it. He wasn't aware of that, but so I cleared that up. He did raise an interesting question. What happens if someone gets on the ballot for two different positions? I suspect that,
Well, if you win both, you get to pick which one you want.
I suspect that with the charter's limitation, the town clerk might refuse to issue you papers for two different offices on the same ballot. However, if we wanted to make that explicit, that you can only run for one office at a time, not just, the charter says you can't hold more than one elective office at a time. But it's worth us thinking about whether in the bylaw, we should say you can't pull papers for more than one office at a time.
I don't know. where I want to.
So what's actually left now? You could be on the planning board, the school committee, or
Select board, school committee, planning board, housing authority, and library trustees. And those, with the exception of library trustees, those always have to be, or not, excuse me. Select board, school committee, and housing authority always have to be elected. Planning board, we could make them appointed. Library trustees, I'm not sure about.
let them alone. If somebody wants to be deranged enough to run for two offices at the same time, let them.
Simultaneous, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, yeah, in the worst case,
maybe they're very talented people.
you know, in the worst case, if you're on the ballot for two different offices and you win both of them, you can only hold one of them.
Right.
But
And town moderator.
so,
But technically also the BBT rep.
yes, they're on the ballot as well. That's not considered a town office. So here's something to think about at this point. Do we want to say anything more about that? The primary purpose of that particular bylaw revision was to avoid redundancy with the charter.
So as far as Dan's comment went, did you circle back to him or should we?
Yeah, I replied to him explaining why that particular thing was removed and suggesting that it's perhaps unlikely that the town clerk would even be willing to give you papers for more than one position on the ballot, given that you're not allowed to hold more than one position. Anyway, so that's it on the action item list. On draft, updated or newer updated bylaw article revisions that we've completed. Article 24, I finally got scenic roads done, and boy,
It's enjoy.
that was more than I thought it would be in terms of the work I had to put into it. And it basically, there was a lot of fairly straightforward things. Publication of notices for consistency, quite a few places where I felt a need to clarify some of the wording. The bylaw article talking about designating a scenic road. The bylaw said the town can designate it. The bylaw really didn't explain how does the town go about, when the town designates, what does that mean? It's the select board or some other board that does that? And what we've actually, because the state law is pretty brief on that, it doesn't really spell it out. Yeah, so we've done it by town meeting vote, and I just made that explicit in the bylaw. The bylaw does not authorize the planning board to charge a filing fee for the permit, but we actually do that. So I thought maybe the bylaw should make it explicitly authorize that.
To designate a road, a scenic road?
No, I'm on the permits to work on scenic roads.
Oh, okay.
So there's two completely separate topics covered by this. One is designating a scenic road. We passed this bylaw in 1987, designated several scenic roads at that time and over the next couple of years. We are not likely to be designating any more scenic roads.
I don't know.
Not impossible.
No, that wasn't to designate, that was to undesignate.
We talked about undesignating a scenic road. We talked about giving other roads some consideration comparable to scenic roads. The specific example was not a road that would in any way, shape, or form qualify as a scenic road. That would be, you know, something else entirely. But, you know, maybe there's another road in town that meets the qualifications for a scenic road that we have not yet designated. So it's, yeah, we'll leave the provision in the bylaw, even if it never gets used again. We'll leave it in and clarify it as needed. So then we get to scenic road permits. I mentioned the filing fee for it. There are a number of other elements of processing permits, which I'm very familiar with from planning board. And the scenic road bylaw really doesn't spell out very much in terms of how we, you know, from beginning to end, how permits are handled. The state law is very brief. It just says you need the consent of the planning board. It doesn't address, other than you need the consent of the board and the board has to hold a hearing on it, really nothing else. So, you know, I've added quite a bit here for consistency of procedures. You know, authorizing an applicant to request an extension of time to complete work on the project. I think we may have actually done that with scenic road permits in the past, extended times past the deadline spelled out in the law. Sort of just assuming that procedures we use for other permits apply here. And it's kind of adding that kind of stuff. Added a requirement that the planning board decision be filed with the select board, the town clerk, and the tree warden, because we really don't say, well, what happens to the permit once we're done with it. Added what we call a constructive approval clause. That is, and this works with some of the other planning board permits. If the board doesn't issue a final decision within the deadlines that were given, we are assumed to have approved it. And I thought it'd be worthwhile to add that in here. Added a clause to explain the appeal procedure. I think that the appeal procedure to Superior Court is pretty much, you know, implicit in that the statute that it cites. So whether we say it or not, the appeal procedure is there, but it's useful to explain it, you know, just with one sentence. This decision, you can appeal it to Superior Court. Then the other thing, the thing that the planning board really wanted to see in here was enforcement penalties. So I've added a section on that. One other minor detail, there was a question about the definition of major branches. I found what looked to me like a reasonable definition of that.
Did you find, so there's, it talks about that in J2 bylaw too. I remember laughing, looking through, saying, oh, well, when do they measure the size of the branches?
Yeah.
Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, so I found a definition that I thought would be reasonable there.
Yeah, chop this is spring and fall.
Yeah.
Take care of the ideal gas law for trees.
Yes. So I don't know if anybody have any comments or thoughts, but I tried to think through the enforcement piece of it in terms of what happens if the town doesn't follow the procedures for designating a scenic road or doesn't follow the procedures for holding hearings and all that. That's where that construction approval thing comes from. And then what happens if someone does the work that they should get a permit for and don't? We've had issues with that from time to time. So we've got a provision in here which basically says, you know, if you're doing work for which you should have got a permit, we're going to tell you to stop and apply for a permit. And if you don't do that within 30 days, then we get tougher. You have to undo the work you did and pay a fine. If you get a permit, but you do more than the permit allows you to do, or you fail to do things in accordance with the permit, we tell you to fix it up. If you don't do that, we hit you with fines. And I included a non-criminal disposition option here, which is something that is part of the broader topic of penalties that we need to work on, and we need to get move that work forward. We can talk about that later in the meeting. But I thought it's worthwhile adding it here as an option. As with most cases of non-criminal disposition, we include it as an optional, something optional, so. If we want to be able to use it, there are certain other things that we have to do. In order to be able to use it, but at least the bylaw gives us that possibility. So otherwise you have to take something to court to do anything. So I have, in here, we've added a whole enforcement procedure, which hopefully the planning board will. Well, I will definitely want the planning board to review the whole thing, and they may have some thoughts of all the changes that made here.
The many thoughts I had, one, I know we've expressed some sensitivity to renumbering things, and it's minor, but if we felt strongly about the added section coming before the severability clause, or if we could leave that as it was in section 8 and make a new section, section 9.
Yeah, I thought about that. I thought for a while about it. It just, to me, severability clause is generally the very last clause, so.
Yeah,
Except.
the other point there, Brian, is you don't refer to that
Yeah,
anywhere else, so it's not as if it's gonna become law, you know, you're gonna have to worry about, well, now we gotta go back and say something else.
Yeah, I generally prefer not to renumber things, except where it really seems to make sense. I worry much more about renumbering the bylaw, the changing the bylaw article number.
Yeah.
I'd love to change 28A to 28, but other than that, those are the things, those are the types of things that are more important to preserve the numbering. I think the wetlands bylaw it's on its third number since it was first created.
I know we've talked
Section
about.
numbering generally, where
severability.
it doesn't, where it seems harmless, I don't mind.
Put in a blanket one.
Well, we have a blanket one, chapter, article 1, section 7.
Validity.
Yeah, it's called validity, but it could also be severability.
Yes,
And I believe it is the same text.
yeah, but, just as sort of a side comment, we, at some point, we'll want to review all of the severability clauses for consistency of language. Town council had recommended that.
Okay, so it is slightly different. This one specifies by Supreme Judicial Court of the Commonwealth, and the more specific one says by court of competent jurisdiction. So, yeah, it may be good to.
That's on my list of things to do at some point before we're all done. That's one thing.
Yeah.
Another thing I want to do before we're all done is get, and I think we've mentioned this a time too, consistency in how state law is referenced.
Yeah.
Is it MGL, is it GL, is it general laws, is it Massachusetts general laws? Is it
And the abbreviations and the little.
How do you
symbols.
abbreviate chapters and sections? How do you refer to them? So I'm fairly consistent when I add something or change something. I'm fairly consistent in the way I do it, but you'll see even within this, there are some inconsistencies because I haven't gone through and changed things that don't otherwise need changing.
I'm wondering if we can do that just as a single article, as
Yeah, that's
a standard, apply this standard formatting to all Mass General Law references.
right. There may be that and maybe some other cases where it's just a blanket, just do this throughout the bylaws.
I think that's what we did with select board.
Yeah, that's how the select board wording was changed in the bylaws.
Yeah.
I don't even have one of those little squiggly things that you have there, section. Am I keeping?
No, you don't.
Where did you find that?
I get it by holding down the option key and typing 6.
Oh,
But your keyboard may work differently than that. There is probably a combination of keys that will do that.
stand on your head.
The only other thoughts I had, Dave, especially, after the discussion at town meeting, where we're being more explicit, or explicit for the first time about how scenic road is designated, do we want to consider how to remove that designation?
Yeah.
Or is it intended, once it's granted, it's intended to remain in perpetuity?
I think the assumption that was made when the state law was created and when this bylaw was created, the assumption was made that once you've designated a scenic road, you would never want to undesignate it.
Right, it just gives protection. I think that the person's concept there was if we make it a non-scenic road, will that mean it's cheaper to do the
Right.
work?
Right, the reasons, I mean, I can imagine perhaps someday in the future, one of our scenic roads where all those nice scenic trees just died. Or there's an overwhelming reason to widen the road, take away the stone walls, do all sorts of stuff. You conceivably could want to undesignate or remove scenic road.
Theoretically, you could go through the planning board process to say, this is all the work that needs to be done for these reasons and still get it done despite the designation.
Yeah, I think I would tend to leave that alone.
Yeah.
I would also tend to say that sort of implicitly, it would be considered reasonable to say that the process we went through to designate a scenic road, you would follow the same process for undesignated scenic road, which would be some notice, some hearings, ultimately a town meeting vote. One would, if the situation ever came up, one would either assume that
Yeah,
the same process would be
the way you
followed.
make the law, you unmake it the same way.
Yeah,
Yeah, you could go to the town meeting, put on the town meeting warrant, say, we're gonna make this no longer a scenic road. And that's gonna fly. You know, you change the bylaw with respect to one road, whatever.
yeah, after that discussion at town meeting, I have to think, I wonder if we ought to contemplate putting an undesignation procedure into the bylaw. If I were to put one in, that into the bylaw, I would tend to say it should require at least a 2/3 vote.
I mean, it's true, you don't wanna. I agree, town meeting playing ping pong with it back and forth.
I'm kind of tempted to say that the first step in removing the scenic bylaw designation from the road would be proposing the ability to remove. And just leave it at that.
Right, the bylaw does not provide for undesignating a road. If the need should arise, let's amend the bylaw to allow that and to spell out the procedure. But yeah, I'm comfortable leaving it out for now. Although, yes, after that discussion at town meeting, I did think about it.
The only other item I had was on 8.5 on non-criminal disposition. We talk about the enforcing agent. And section 8 starts by talking about the agents of the planning board. Was the intent that any of those agents of the planning board could be enforcing agents? And if so, do we want to make that clearer?
Yeah, that was the intent. And that question, the question about the agent of the planning board, the planning board agents who are authorized to enforce that, that's something that I will expect the planning board to review and weigh in on. Yeah, I threw in here basically every officer that for which it might make sense for them to enforce this. But that's, I'm looking for the planning board to advise us on what the board thinks is most appropriate. And my first thought would be the tree warden, because a lot of scenic roads are about trees, but it's also about stone wall. Tree warden, isn't a stone wall warden. And the building inspector is often the one who sees this first.
You know what I would, so we put where other officers designated by the board, change officers to agents. And then enforcement thing.
Yep, that works for me. And I think the down under on non-criminal and the enforcing agent, I think that's sufficiently clear reference back to the first paragraph of section 8. Because it's enforced by the planning board through its agents. So those are pretty obviously the enforcing agents.
Yeah.
Maybe could we say any of the enforcing agents?
any enforcing agent may,
I'm wondering,
Yeah, just something that implies more than one. The singular almost implies that there would just be a single.
Right,
We've
that-
listed multiple.
that ties it a little bit more clearly back to the first paragraph of
Yeah.
the section where we had, that section identifies several possible enforcing agents. So under non-criminal, any of those agents, that makes it a little bit clearer as to what it's referring to. It might.
That works.
agree
I'm
with
wondering
that.
if instead of having the leading text, the text after section 8 enforcement, that became 8.1, and then the new 8.6 could reference 8.1 directly. That'd make it a little bit easier.
Yeah, could do that. I actually thought about that for at least a moment, that sort of, it looks a little odd structurally, but then I thought, what do I title that? What heading do I give that?
Enforcement officers,
Yeah.
Enforcement agents.
enforcing agent, there you go. Yeah, so some of the sections have text before the subsection and some don't. It's kind of,
Yeah,
it's not consistent. And then some have the word section before the section, the subsection number, and some don't, even in this article.
yeah. Yeah, I think I should go through and make that a little bit more consistent.
And it wasn't just the stuff that you added, it was already
I
inconsistent.
know. Yeah, some of you're right, and it's some of the stuff that I haven't touched where those inconsistencies remain.
Yeah.
Yeah, the question of restoration when you cut a tree.
Yeah,
I scratched my head a little bit, but you can put a stone wall back together. You can't put a tree back together.
But I think it would fall back to the determination of the planning board. It's like, what's the best avenue to remedy?
Plant a nice new tree.
Yeah, well, that's where I ended up with this. If you cut a tree,
Yeah,
the best we can do is make you put a new tree in there.
yeah, one of the ones referenced in the town shade tree bylaw, not just any tree.
Yeah.
Right, well, what I put in here was specifically was a tree that was removed without permission shall be replaced with a new tree of a size and species deemed appropriate by the tree warden as a suitable replacement for the lost tree.
I can see Kevin going out now.
Let's see.
Use wood glue, put all the sawdust back together again.
And maybe if you had to use the right kind of wood glue, the tree will actually become healthy.
You have to cut it down to start with.
Okay, so, yeah. I want to try to do this on the fly, but I'll go back through and
Yeah,
make section numbering, the formatting more consistent.
yeah, it's only section 3 that puts
Yeah.
section in front of the subsection, so that would be easy.
Matter of fact. Just delete the word section in front of 3.1, 3.2.
Yep.
There you
Highlight.
go.
highlight in red.
Done. All right, so if we're good with that, then we'll throw this out there for public consumption.
Yep.
And the next one on my list that's been circulated for our consideration tonight is Article 16. You had a couple of changes on that one, Greg?
Yeah. So we had previously received a comment from the town that dogs running at large was kind of the unusual title for the topics covered in this section. So I named it animal control. I think we had talked about maybe an animal control officer, but that I thought was a little bit too specific. So I went with animal control. And the other thing was that our animal control officer says that the section 1 fee for failure to license a dog should be 6 months and not 3. That was,
Yeah, my only comment on that is that in the heading, the page heading, you might want to change.
and I kind of left it at the existing article title rather than, so it is proposing revisions to the Article 16 dogs running at large.
Yeah.
So it's not an actual revision yet. That was my,
That's reasonable. That when this is ultimately incorporated into the bylaws, there may be others. If we change titles, we may do that.
28A we did as well.
Right, for now, yeah, leave it as is.
I think 28 didn't end up going back to just fire department with the.
I don't remember if it ended up being exactly the same as it started.
All right, so
Okay, so we've got the change to the January 1st and March 1st.
Yeah.
In that, yeah.
So the other one I sent out was Article 40, which drastically simplified the changes.
yeah,
Changes is just striking a single line.
I have an issue with that. Reviewing and reviewing the 53E and a half in particular. I think that the table of
That's done at the town meeting. I mean,
right, but I think there is a distinction between the table of accounts that are being authorized and the annual dollar amounts. The annual dollar amounts. I had this on my screen, then I had to restart the computer, so I have to bring it back. So 53E and a half appears to require the bylaw to specify for each fund the programs or activities for which the revolving fund may be expended, the departmental receipts in connection with those programs, the funding sources. The board department or officer are authorized to expend the funds and reporting or other requirements. So what the bylaw had in it was that plus the dollar amount, annual dollar amount. The annual dollar amount does not have to, it should not appear in the bylaw. But the list of funds, the way I read 53 and have the list of funds needs to be there.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not saying remove those from the bylaw. I'm saying they're not included in this draft because I didn't want to apply the changes made at town meeting. That's all.
Okay. Yeah, so that, right, and what the current bylaw, the bylaw also included the dollar amounts, which should not be in the bylaw.
Okay.
So, yeah, that,
I got the sense that what they were kind of trying to do with the bylaw article was just see what's still used and what isn't used, as opposed to this, and whether you have to continually revote at town meeting the existence of a.
right. So my understanding would be that the bylaw itemizes the revolving funds that you have. The annual town meeting vote authorizes the dollar limit for that fiscal year for each of those funds. And when you add or remove funds from the list, you update the bylaw. And we did have some funds that were removed from the list this year. So ultimately, when we bring the bylaw in, the bylaw should have the revised list of funds, but not the dollar amounts.
So it doesn't, the section doesn't say it needs it, but it also doesn't say that it can't have it. So I guess the question is, do we want to make it such that we don't have to update that section of the bylaw every year?
Yeah, to me,
Unless there are changes in the funds.
it would streamline it to pull them out.
Right,
So
so what I think the bylaw should include is, what it includes now is the board department officer authorized to expend. It includes revenue source and maximum expenditure. I would remove maximum expenditure because that's not appropriate for the bylaw, but revenue source is. Funds may be expended for, that belongs in the bylaw. Fiscal years, I think we don't need to include that. So right now, the current bylaw includes more than it should, which is the source of some confusion.
Mhm.
Right, but with my understanding that you got a revolving fund. If you needed, you went to the town meeting and got authorization to have one.
Right.
So, like the fire department needs assistance, say, just in general, to review sprinkler plans for a 500,000 square foot building. Well, if we're gonna start building those, then we're gonna need a revolving fund to be able to charge the people that are building them. Instead of having it be permit fees and then try to get the money back to spend it, to have a sprinkler contractor do the work for the town, like.
Yeah, so that's the purpose of chapter 44, section 53, is to allow us to have those funds. And to do that in a way that's simplifies. What we used to have to do years ago is a separate warrant article for every revolving fund. And we had to go through a whole rigmarole for each revolving fund. 53 simplifies that a bit. So one bylaw article,
With the revolving funds in it.
right? One bylaw article itemizes all of the authorized revolving funds.
Right.
And if you need a new revolving fund, you add that to that bylaw article so that the town has properly authorized the fund. You then annually at town meeting, you set the dollar limit. The city or town shall honor before July 1st of each year, vote on the limit on the total amount that may be expended from each revolving fund established under this section.
So theoretically, you could have $1 million in a revolving fund, but just authorize the expenditure of 50,000.
Yeah, right. Town meeting says this is how much you can spend out of the revolving fund. Now, it so happens that you can increase that limit above what town meeting voted with the approval of the select board and the finance committee.
Right. That's going to be under the.
So you've got some,
organization.
right,
Yeah.
you've got some flexibility there. But yeah, I think the key is, and we'll get to that, we'll get that in eventually, is we'll revise the bylaw so that it doesn't include things that it ought not include, but it does include everything it needs.
it leaves open the possibility, if for whatever reason, if we want an account to go dormant and we're not expecting any activity, we could reduce the town meeting authorization to 0, but that wouldn't have the effect of removing it from the list. If we want to bring it back in a future year, then that's what the next.
Right, if we decided we no longer need it, and
Yeah,
we
then
don't
you could
see any
remove it.
reason for
Yeah.
it, remove it from the list. If we don't think we're gonna use it this year, but maybe in the future, yeah, we could set the dollar limit to 0. We need felt that was appropriate.
It could be the syntax of some of the discussions that occurred, but there were several revolving funds that were removed by omission that we used to have. So what does that mean? What happened with the money that was there?
Let's see, upon termination of a revolving fund, the balance in the fund at the end of that fiscal year reverts to surplus revenue. So the statute spells out what happens to any money that's left.
There'll be a bug in my blind for the next time that comes up. Well, it was kind of like, well, we don't use this anymore. Oh, well, let's get rid of it. Well, if there was a boatload of cash in there that people had paid to do stuff with, then the money should have gone back if it was unused.
Gone back where?
To whomever funded it.
But it's funded by like people spending money at Silver Lake or paying for a recreation program.
Well,
Or things like that.
it could also be for plan reviews.
Yeah, so you can't really identify who paid the money because it all goes into a pool. And then that pool is spent by the department authorizing it.
Right, under the rules that are set up for whatever that the purposes of that revolving fund. So if they, so what I'm saying, Greg, is at the end, if people have paid for something that they haven't received,
Yeah, if. I think that if money was paid into a revolving fund for a specific purpose like that, you know, the portion of that money that was not used for that purpose, before you closed out the revolving fund, you would refund that to whoever paid it in.
right, that,
But that's not,
That would be part of the normal operation of that revolving fund. That, you know, even if it was an ongoing revolving fund, if you're taking that for like, you know, engineering review fees.
right,
Whatever you didn't spend, you know, at the point you determined that the project is done and you didn't spend all the money, you would refund it to the applicant.
yeah, so it's.
I don't think that's what the purpose of the revolving.
I'm not sure that these revolving funds are used. that
No,
way.
it's like someone pays admission for Silver Lake, so they're paying for admission to Silver Lake. But then that money, instead of going into the general fund, goes into the revolving fund. And then the rec department uses that admission money to pay the staff, to buy the food, to pay for maintenance. So the person that paid the money got the thing for which they paid the money.
So and I guess I go back to the revolving fund that we had a long time ago, we had two of them for the Board of Health, had to do with Title V and septic system repairs
Yeah,
and so forth. So that, Secretary of War.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
On the ground, I'll incriminate myself. No. So, and I don't actually even remember, Greg, what the funding source was with that. And it was, some of it was plan review, because for a time, we didn't have somebody that was certified to do septic plans. With some of the changes you did with Title V, then the town engineer got his stuff. There was a variety of different things that happened with that. Then it was also, like I said, that we could fund septic repairs at people's houses who had a hardship. And then you wind up virtually being a mortgage holder on that, or taking a betterment kind of thing. So I just don't, I wonder in practicality, the idea of a fee for engineering services. So you put $20,000 down, and at the end of the project, if the town doesn't use that 20 grand, it goes back to the people. So the money didn't go into the town's general fund. It went into a revolving fund for plan review. And when it didn't get used, it got returned.
I don't think you would use that for an individual person or an individual project. So that would be more of an escrow fund, I think.
Well, I,
If it did land in a revolving account, I think it would be up to whoever's administering that revolving account to either keep records at a level of detail to allow them to refund money that way. But yeah, to me, that would all fall under their administration of the account.
right,
Yes, that would be considered an expense out of that.
Yeah.
yeah.
Return of money collected but not used.
Yeah, you could have a question. So does the return of excess paid in count against what you're authorized to spend during the year? Or is that just a return of funds? To me, that's not an expense, but we'll let somebody else deal with that.
Yeah, just to make sure, maybe ask about the mechanics of how the revolving funds work.
So I've looked at a few of the other town bylaws and some of them include them and some of them don't. The yearly limit. So I think we're probably okay removing that and the effective date. I think we probably want to go to Mary and say, we think we can remove these two things. Is that going to cause any issues for you? Because she's the one that specified the changes.
Yeah, like I said, my reading of the statute makes it reasonable clearly that
I think so
the
too.
effective date column and the dollar amount in that other column are not appropriate to be included in the bylaw. But the identification of the accounts, the funding source, and the purpose, yeah, that seems to belong there, but only that.
Yeah.
How we got into the habit of including the dollar amounts and the effective dates in the bylaw, I don't know.
Yeah.
Someone,
I'll talk to her about that because I talked to Mary quickly.
it doesn't seem to me like it should be all that complicated. You don't want dollar amounts in the bylaw because you vote those every year at town meeting. There's no point in including them in the bylaw. It only serves to be confusing. And the effective date, well, you know, when you put it in the bylaw, it becomes effective. And who cares when it first went into the bylaw? That information is just not interesting.
Yeah, and the ones in the bylaw, that thing that the warrant article are all the current year because they're talking about the effective date of the amount. So that really
Yes.
doesn't give any kind of history there. So I think
Yeah.
we're probably okay removing it. But I would like to have that reviewed first.
Yep.
If
Sounds
so,
like a plan.
I can put that back in once I can just pull the information from the warrant.
All right. I think that's all that we have for new or updated bylaws.
And that has to be a fairly recent article because it's after Article 39, which is the marijuana establishments.
Yes. It was probably not more than 2 or 3 years ago that we put that in. And I think that had to do with the Municipal Modernization Act, which 53E and a half was either part of that or was amended as part of that. But yeah, there was this push to make some financial procedures simpler.
Yeah. It did.
So anything else on that? So you'll be updating that, Greg?
Yep.
And pending input from Mary.
Yep.
Sounds good. Next thing on my list, we're moving on to the next agenda item, discussion of bylaw article revisions remaining to be completed. Probably need to at some point need to deal with our sort of the open question about posting requirements. And
This is one of the problems that we have when young Skipper was at home, because I have a pile of stuff about posting. Stuff that Candy did look up, and there's kind of inference in it, and naturally that's in paper sitting next to where my computer would be, and we'll be able to give you feedback on that. However,
yeah, so I'll just sort of put the bug in our ear that I think we want to try to nail that down. What we've been doing in our proposed bylaw revisions is one of two things. In some cases, we've been sort of aiming for consistent language saying something is to be published in a local newspaper, relying on a definition in Article 1 of what local newspaper means. The other is sort of more generically in compliance with town posting requirements. And so part of the posting requirements is things that need to be published in the local newspaper. And what I've got as a tentative addition to Article 1 to cover that part is a section that says, when in a bylaw, an item is required to be published in a local newspaper, the words local newspaper shall mean a newspaper of general circulation in the town of Grafton and the town's website. I chose to write it that way rather than as a definition, because there aren't any other definition. We don't have a definition section. If we need one, I might consider that. If that shows up in the charter as essentially a definition of the term local newspaper, and I've replicated that language here, just cast it in a more slightly different format that says, whatever any bylaw says published in the local newspaper, this is what it means. So that is, and that's for our further consideration as we think about some of the other parts about posting requirements, which have to do with town meeting warrants, finance committee recommendations, and notices of adjourned town meetings. There are some specific requirements in Article 2 and Article 3 about those, which we have yet to really try to nail down. But that's sort of the other part, that because it's those three town meeting related things show up in two different bylaw articles, we may want to add something to Article 1 here, sort of generically covering those. Those are similar but not necessarily identical. And I don't have any recommendations other than those are the posting requirements that we still need to nail down how we want to express them. We've talked about issues with posting it in a conspicuous location in every precinct. This language there talks about making copies available in the library and its branches, which we don't have any branches anymore. So how we want to deal with that is something that we want to nail down. And apparently you've got some information, Skip, that speaks to it.
Yeah, yep.
So we can discuss that more when your
I
information
will
is
flush it
available for
out.
distribution.
Yes.
So the other thing I'll mention, that's sort of a generic thing, is penalties. At some point, Chief Crapo asked me about that at that town meeting. If you guys do anything with non-criminal disposition? Yeah, and a while back, I had asked the question of all of the town agencies that are currently authorized to use 21D. What are you actually doing with it? And I finally got, I think, the last response I was expecting, which was basically, no, we don't really do anything. But the only one who's actively using 21D right now is police. They're using it to enforce marijuana laws. The Board of Health has some tobacco enforcement, which is not necessarily, not directly addressed by the bylaws. They don't do much, but they do something with tobacco enforcement. Fire chief said he'd like to use it, he plans to use it, but he's not currently set up to use it. The obstacle to actually using it, of course, is number one, it has to be authorized by bylaw. Some of our bylaw authorizations don't really work because they don't name a specific enforcing officer, or they don't name a specific penalty. That we can fix. Sort of on my list of things to go back and we just fix that. The other thing about using 21D is you have to have a citation form that's been approved by the district court, which is where these things have been processed. At some point, the citation form that the chief has for marijuana is basically got a specific checkoff for the marijuana statute. It's got a generic checkoff for other bylaws, so it's sort of, it could sort of be used. But we probably, and this probably is off topic to take up with Evan as to sort of, maybe coming up with a generic citation form that any town officer can use for any of 21D. So then there's a question of who's actually going to want to use it. We can authorize its use in the bylaw. It may or may not actually get used, but at least it's authorized. So that's sort of the direction I'm thinking in terms of specific bylaws. We talked earlier about the scenic road, where I've included non-criminal disposition as an option there. And being on that one,
I had a question, I was gonna circle back, do my own research first, but we might as well ask him now. You mentioned needing to specify the penalty. And I wasn't sure if the bylaw needed to specify the penalty, or if it was good enough, if it was specified on the approved form, once it gets to that point. Because I don't think the bylaw, or the section that you added on non-criminal disposition got that far.
Yeah, it referred back to it possibly will, it may possibly need to be clarified. That town council may be able to revise the exact wording, but it basically, you refer to the penalties that the bylaw specifies for the violation are exact amount, for $300 for a violation, which is the maximum that state law allows us to charge. So the bylaw, the proposed scenic roads bylaw has specific penalties and then says you could use non-criminal disposition for that. So I think that works.
Sure.
Something that a lot of non-criminal disposition bylaws do is they have like a sliding scale, $50 for the first offense, 100 for the second, 200 for the third and subsequent expenses. That actually might be a good idea, but there's some additional administrative overhead with that though. Because now you have to keep track of each offender. Is this their first offense or second offense? It may be worth it. The people that are going to actually do this may want to do it that way, which is fine. I think we'd be more than happy to take guidance from the folks who are actually going to be using non-criminal disposition. So, but I think we're at a point now where we want to reach out and identify the additional opportunities that people want to exploit for non-criminal disposition. I know there's an interest on the part of the building inspector to use it for violations of the zoning bylaw. That's not something that we are going to take up as part of our job. And I've talked to Evan about that. And he realizes that, yeah, we might want to amend the zoning bylaw to allow the use of non-criminal disposition. This committee's job doesn't include the zoning bylaw, so. Well, somebody.
Let him prepare a proposal.
And now, on the other hand, as a planning board member, am eventually going to be involved with discussions on that. But for our purposes, leave that part of it alone. So we'll have some more. I think I will reach out to through Evan, talk with Evan about how we want to go about identifying other bylaws for which
It
the
might,
town would like to use 21D. And let's see, we have some other bylaw articles that are somewhere in the works. Skip, you have several that you were kind of waiting to hear what happened with the town clerk article before you did
Yeah,
any
okay.
work.
yeah, then so the town clerk article kind of puts a bunch of stuff in the charter that would say, okay, fine, do we just want to take it?
Yeah, so you.
It's almost like, okay, now we did that, so now we got this big giant blurb in the charter,
So you were
nothing really to put in the bylaw for the town clerk.
Right. So you were to look at the town clerk.
Right, yeah,
At the charter, the new charter provision, and
then you gotta say, okay.
try to line the bylaws up with that.
Yeah, and there's not really too much to, I'm kind of left wondering what we even really, there's no sense in. There's nothing extra other than,
I don't think there's anything in the new charter that isn't actually approved yet, because the legislature hasn't
No.
filed that wasn't already in the charter. So I don't think there's really anything there that, the stuff in the bylaws, unless it was already duplicating stuff in the charter, probably isn't newly duplicating stuff in the charter. So,
yeah, so we weren't sure. Other than the change to an appointed position, what was going to be included in the charter change. So now if the state legislature goes and approves of that, then we're all set with that, but it leaves me kind of wondering what we even want to put in the bylaws relative to those positions.
Well, I think, so the bylaw speaks to the role and the responsibilities of the office. To me, that doesn't change. All that we're looking to change or have the state legislature change on our behalf is how that position gets appointed. So to me, the office will continue to run, look at the sections in the current bylaw, it's, office hours and some provisions related to town meeting and other fees and things that the town clerk collects. To me, none of that changes because of this change. If we want to change any of that during, as a matter of course for our review, then, that we can do whatever we want.
I don't even, so to be quite frank, I don't even know if that list of fees even has to appear in the bylaw. But that's where I'm kind of gonna go with this is, in the end, do we have anything left over that we even want to have in the bylaw?
what you're saying is I don't think that there's anything that's currently in the bylaw now that is suddenly obsolete because of this change.
Right,
But that is what you would want to look at.
yeah, so once it was all squared away is, okay, where we're gonna go.
Yeah, so now we know what the proposed charter
Yeah.
change is. We can now review that proposed charter with what the bylaws have and see if there's anything we need to change in the bylaw.
Yeah.
So take that as a,
Yeah, well, that's,
you'll work on that.
yes.
Yeah.
And we're gonna do the same thing with, so Mary also had submitted her finance director bylaw thing. Do we put that in there or should that, should we suggest that as a change to the charter and put it in the bylaw for a while?
I don't think that needs to be mentioned in either the charter or the bylaw. I think that falls under Evan's authority as administrator to define the administrative organization, which should be published as an appendix to the bylaw. So there's some procedural details about that, but basically it's up to Evan to structure the administrative organization of the town the way he deems to be best. And we mentioned this before, that the bylaw in Article 1 already has a provision that says regarding changes in job titles,
Right.
that the bylaw has a provision that deals with that. So where the bylaws mentions town accountant, what it really means is whoever in town is performing the
The
functions
duties of the town accountant. Yeah.
So some of the position titles in the bylaw may become obsolete, but as long as
that's
roll
the
their
point we
plans.
have to, as part of this whole thing is we have to reach with them and yes. You can do it, but there's a process that goes with doing that and we have to have that appendix
Yeah.
fixed.
Yeah, Evan's taken that as well, by publishing it in the annual town report or the budget document. He publishes an org chart in the budget document. That's not quite what the charter says he should be doing. The charter says you need to specifically get town meeting to vote to approve your change in administrative organization.
Yeah.
Eventually, I think we could convince them to do that.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would help clear the hurdle if there's any, and to Dan's point earlier, that could help fill some gaps in terms of making sure that the public, the town is aware of the organization. But town meeting hasn't approved it. There's been no vote, at town meeting, we vote on the budget numbers. We don't vote on a package.
We also vote to accept the reports of all town officers. It's implicitly by accepting a report that has that in it, you could say town meeting approved it, but that's not on the spirit of what the charter says.
Right.
The charter wants town meeting to look at that table of organization and approve it.
The warrant specifically says to hear and not accept, and there's a difference in
Yes.
meaning there.
Without, except we hear the report without approving any action.
But this is something that, I'm not sure how far back it goes, but Tim did this
Yeah.
with filling and not filling jobs and stuff like that.
Town administrators have been revising the table of organization from the beginning. The only time town meeting has ever voted on that table of organization is when we created the Department of Public Works. And that the town meeting voted to adopt that, which became Appendix A. It has never been put to a town meeting vote since then by any town administrator.
Yeah, so it should be, and that's what started this was, gee, what the hell is this? No, we don't need this. Oh, wait, a minute, we do need this, and this is what's supposed to happen, so we gotta get this to happen.
Yeah. So the other work that's pending. Evan's still working on Articles 19 and 20. I have to probably chat with him next week and see where he's at with that. Article 24, I just did. I'm still working on the shade tree bylaw. Having gone through the scenic roads bylaw, I mean, I'm now turning my attention to the shade tree bylaw. Haven't quite decided. There's some stuff in there that probably doesn't really need to be there.
That could have been from when we adopted that whole
Yeah.
scenic.
Yeah, the shade tree bylaw goes back to around the year 2000, that long after the scenic road bylaw.
Oh, so I know, what I'm thinking is the Grafton is a tree town,
Tree
USA,
city,
and
yeah.
you've got to adopt all this stuff.
Yep. That was, that's brought to work, and I think I want to spend some time talking to the tree warden. The other things on my plate, the other major thing I've got in the works is Article 12. There's a fair number of things in there that are looking to be, that need to be fixed up and updated. One part of it, I'm still waiting for the Accessibility Advisory Commission to get back to me as to what needs to happen to the handicap parking part of it. They're still, they've handed that off to the consultant they use, and they're still waiting for him to get that done. Got a few other articles that there's a finance committee article that's still waiting for some work. Part of that is going to be
We need the results of the
results of
vote
the
next
vote
week. Yeah.
next week.
So we will have a meeting in June of the finance committee, and we will talk about it then.
Yeah. So I know that work. There's a select board article that I don't know how much work it's gonna need, but there's a reference in this select board article about a bound book. You need to figure out what that means, what to do with that.
To the best of everybody's knowledge, it's not a thing that we do anymore.
Yeah, so maybe as simple as just removing that, but it's, still looking for, looking for your proposed update to that article.
Yep.
We've got an article waiting to be done on the assessors.
Yeah, I've got a few on my plate that should be wrapped up next week. Yeah, I've got some time off and be able to plow through it.
I've got your name on assessors and town council.
Town council, yep.
Licenses and permits and delinquent taxpayers and the alarms.
Yeah.
On Article 27, the license and permits of delinquent taxpayers, there is a select board policy document that relates to that. There's a select board policy, you can find it on their website. It has to do with a certificate of good standing. You can read through that and see figure out the extent to which that relates to Article 27, or maybe it's part of the implementation of Article 27, not quite clear. I happened to notice that the other day looking at the select board policy documents, and yeah, there may be a connection there. Skip, you've got a few that you're working on then. And the other things on my list of pending, we've already talked about penalties and notices. We've got a few other topics that we've touched on, severability clauses, mass general law, statute references, possibly other things that seems like we are making good progress towards having a complete set of proposed revisions, at least an initial
complete set of proposed revisions for consideration and further review by the public and other parties and relevant parties. We had originally, our schedule that we first laid out suggested that we might have a sort of a public hearing this month. And then, thinking that we basically have gone through everything by now. We're not quite there, but I think we're probably close enough that we can, what I promised at town meeting Monday night was maybe in June, we'd have kind of a sort of an informal public hearing to discuss and review and discuss all of the bylaw revisions that we have to date.
We've been virtually having an ongoing thing of that with the public comment section.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, yeah, it may turn out that with all the, the interaction that we've had with the public, that, we're not gonna get a lot out of a somewhat more formal public hearing. But, still in all, it's probably worth our while to advertise that, saying, come to this meeting, this meeting is all about getting your feedback on everything that we've proposed.
Yeah, you can't tell what's gonna motivate people to do stuff.
Right.
We had a bunch of public hearings about no smoking and nobody came, so just tell that we'll post it as the bylaws that we're gonna adopt, and boy, did people come out of the woodwork that night.
Yes, it's always when it comes out, and what we can count on is at the October town meeting, getting all sorts of stuff that we're gonna sit there thinking, how come you guys didn't tell us about this
Yeah.
before?
Or where were you before, the 85 times we tried
Yes.
to get you to take part in the process?
We've been,
That's the way it goes.
but that's the way it goes. I mean, you neighbors know that's always the way. We'll have, in any case, we'll have probably the last week of September or so, the finance committee will hold the public hearing on the warrant. And we haven't yet decided to really talk about much how we are going to put this on the warrant. Will it be one warrant article for every bylaw article? Will it be one warrant article for the whole shebang? Almost certainly, we don't want to do it that way. But how exactly we parcel this out into warrant articles is not something that we really need to figure out just yet.
Yeah, I think just a thought for that is, we should take the ones that are virtually clerical in nature, and put them as one of these proverbial consent things.
Right. Yeah,
Or actually, then the flip side of it is put them all on there.
yeah.
And then group them all, group 1 through 36 as a consent thing. These are all punctuation things, renumbering, taking multiple references out, see if that, and then the ones with substance, we'll leave them as one.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I've kind of had thoughts, to the extent that I've thought about it at all, my thoughts have been in that direction of one warrant article that, whether it's an actual warrant article or a series of them lumped under a consent motion, either way, kind of lump together the things that are pretty certain to be non-controversial, and separate the things that are likely to invite considerable discussion and possible opposition. But yes, I think sounds like we're kind of thinking along
It
the
makes
same lines.
sense, yeah. If you put an article for each change, that allows you to drop off a consent article for further debate or something like that, and pass the consent articles all as one.
Yeah, but that would be somewhat logistically easier to deal with than a single warrant article that covers a whole bunch of different bylaw articles.
Yeah.
And the effect is essentially the same, with no controversy, it's one vote on all of them.
Yeah.
But structuring it in separate warrant articles under a consent motion
Right.
gives us the opportunity to easily separate things out that turn out to merit further discussion.
Right.
I think there are some that, we could do a single motion for for the publishing, a single motion for the MGL references. And then we had talked about at one point, one warrant article per bylaw article, and then a consent agenda for everything.
Yeah, so that's roughly, that's probably how we'll end up doing it. Yeah, a few sort of blanket changes similar to what we did for the select board meeting.
Yeah.
And that would be, that would cover whatever other bylaw changes were or were not approved. And then, yeah, I would lean toward that to one warrant article per bylaw article.
Yeah.
Anyway, we got time to work out the details on that.
Yeah.
Okay, so, yeah, so let's get those on our work cut out for us.
I did a little history on Article 40. It was introduced in 2018 with no dollar amounts. Dollar amounts were added in 2019. Just, I think they put them in the table for ease of updating, and then that got put into the bylaws directly. So I think we're okay taking them out.
Yeah.
Along with the year.
Yeah, it goes back to our, one of our guiding principles, I think, is to include in the bylaws only that which really needs to be there.
Yeah.
Make sure that everything needs to be there is there.
Yeah, and I think there are a couple of places I see where it talks about funding source, but the thing that's in there is really a name. So I'm gonna see if we actually have names for these revolving accounts that we can use. So name, authorizing, funding source, and the other thing is if we can clean that table up a bit.
Yep. I think we've proven ourselves to be comfortable changing anything that we see that we think needs changing.
Yeah.
Unlike perhaps previous bylaw review committees that
Didn't want to.
made as few changes as they felt they could get away with. And we're really, I mean, as we said, we're catching up on more than 20 years worth of review that needs to be done. And I'm just, this is me. I look at something, and if it's not written the way I think it should be written,
But
I'm gonna change
the
it.
other thing is, we have a format that's much easier to deal with than,
Yes.
you know, bashing stuff out of paper, you can take it apart, you can do 65 different things, you know, to present it to each other, or, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
But anyways,
I think we've been doing good.
Yeah.
I'm quite happy with the way things have gone so far.
One thing I want to throw out there, the last meeting, Greg had mentioned some scheduling conflicts over the summer. As we get closer, do we want to spend some time in a people meeting, hammering out a summer schedule, or do we kind of emphasize the second and fourth Thursdays? Do we want to go with that, and whoever's able to make it can make it?
Yeah, let's, we should think about our summer schedule. My first thought is, if it turns out to be reasonable and feasible for us, let's keep to our current schedule. But if a different schedule would work out for us better over the summer, we may even decide that once we get into the summer, we've done most of the work, maybe we don't need to be meeting every 2 weeks. Keep that option open. At some point, we're not going to be meeting at all, of course. But yeah, I think we can be flexible if we need to be. So if we're all set with current and future work, we have one agenda item left, which is our minutes of the previous two meetings.
I move to accept the minutes of the previous two meetings as written.
second,
Moved and seconded, the minutes be accepted as written. Don't think I remember seeing anything that I would recommend changing. So, any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Now that we're all in person, we can all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed. The motion carried unanimously. With that, the motion to adjourn could be
So moved.
yeah, second.
moved and seconded, this meeting be adjourned. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed.